trade deadline is come and gone. Who did well? Who did the right thing? Who is stupid? Lindsay Crosby is not stupid. He's on our show.
You are Locked On MLB. Your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. If you don't believe me, how could I have a lower third that claims my name is Sully? I am an Emmy-nominated television producer who has been a baseball podcaster for well over a decade now, and I'm now in my fifth full season here at the Locked On Podcast Network. But this, as you can tell, is a crossover. It's not just a Locked On MLB episode. It's also a Locked On MLB Prospects episode. And guess who's here? The bearded one. Is that Sean Doolittle? No. Is that Rasputin? No. Who is that bearded man?
Lindsay Crosby, host of Locked On MLB Prospects, was thinking maybe I should channel my inner Brian Wilson and maybe add some color to this.
No. Okay. By the way, go to Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter, as long as we still have Twitter, and Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. You'll notice I have the tweet, not the X. I don't know if that's a political statement, but you can follow me on Twitter at Sully Baseball and on Instagram at Sully Baseball Podcast. Okay, before we get into it, we got a lot to talk about. This is not Locked On Beards. Your pal Sully, that's me. I grew a beard for a while. I had a beard for a while. I looked pretty good with a beard. I had a beard when I've had like 3 beards in my life. And the last beard I had was around 2015, 2016. I grew my beard. My beard it looked good, but started coming in really, really gray. And I was not ready to look in the mirror because I have dark hair. You have lighter hair. When you have dark hair and starts going gray, it's kind of yikes.
It stands out.
Yeah, you get that Cruella de Vil vibe. And I have that sort of Reed Richards from the Fantastic Four, Paulie Walnuts from the Sopranos thing going on with the gray streaks on the side. When it started coming in gray, I thought about, should I color it? And then I said, no. I don't want to look like Brian Wilson. I don't want to look like one of those women with the fake beards in Life of Brian. So I shaved the face, and thus you have this baby-faced man right here. Speaking of baby-faced people, several young players have changed hands. I had to get us back.
It's good.
For those of you who are listening to us on the Locked On MLB feed, I really do have to recommend there's not one bad show on the Locked On Podcast Network. And by the way, let's salute Jason Burke from Locked On A's and Nick Morawski of Locked On White Sox, who have been guests on this show. They're 2 terrific guys and terrific podcasters, and they're leaving the Locked On Podcast Network. So I wanted to just give them a shout out and to say we're going to miss you, but I know you got great. I've already talked to Jason, and I'm going to talk to Nick soon. We wish you all the best of luck. It was our privilege to have you part of the network with us. But for those of us who are sticking around, the loyal ones, you got to listen to Locked On MLB Prospects. The show is, Lindsay, you're a really good host. But you also, I always get stuff and from points of view that I hadn't thought of because I don't follow prospects as closely as you do. And in the episode that dropped, we're recording this on the 2nd day of August 2023, in case you're wondering which year. I don't remember if it was the one dropped on the 1st or the 2nd, but it was shortly after the trade deadline. And I listened to your show. I listen to your show a lot. And I was listening to my show in my car, and I think I yelled, testify, preach, say the truth. I've never felt more like I was in a Southern church, like fanning myself, going, that's right. Praise be, because I agreed with almost everything out of your mouth. And it's particularly about the fate of, the post-trade deadline and the fate of 2 teams, the Orioles and the New York Metropolitans. And I made some points on our show. You made them much more eloquently. And I am going to hand the floor over to you, I'll just say briefly, I had said that the Orioles should have offered anybody, including Jackson Holiday, to try to trade for Shohei Ohtani. Jackson Holiday is a pittance for Shohei Ohtani,
Right.
especially for a chance to get into the World Series for the first time since there was only one Indiana Jones movie, and it was called Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It's been a long time.
That's a long time. Ronald Reagan's first term. It's a long time. Cal Ripken's second year. It's been a long time. I was 11. It's a long time. And that the chance to get to the World Series, even if it meant just a cameo, kind of the way that Jack Morris had a cameo with the Twins, kind of the way that Ivan Rodriguez had a cameo with the Marlins, that having this core of players, the Rutschmans and the Hendersons and all of them, having World Series experience under their belt early, that to me, the chance to do that is worth Jackson Holiday. Turns out the Angels decided to hold on. That's another topic for us to cover later, because that's kind of blowing up their face because Lucas Giolito wet the bed today. But you had thoughts about the fact that the Orioles didn't make a giant blockbuster move, even though they could and they should have. So I've said my point. Lindsay, the floor is yours.
The Baltimore Orioles, and Mark Elias specifically, the general manager, committed baseball malpractice at the trade deadline. Because think about the scenario that you're in. The Baltimore Orioles, as we go into August 2nd, are in first place in the division. They have the best record in the American League. Now, they're doing this with a rotation that I believe the scientific term is hot garbage. This is not a good rotation. Look at who, they're rolling out Kyle Gibson, Kyle Bradish, Dean Kramer are their 1 through 3. They called Grayson Rodriguez back up. And so at the trade deadline, you have the number one farm system in baseball. You have a clear and obvious need because you have all of these pitchers who are already at or past their career inning highs in the end of July. And what do? You hug your prospects. You go out and you trade for Jack Flaherty and no one else.
Yeah.
Some of the pitchers moved in the last week include Lance Lynn, Lucas Giolito, Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, Aaron Savali, Jordan Montgomery. 6 starters right there. And they go and they get Jack Flaherty. And that's it.
And the day before the Verlander trade, I said the obvious landing spot for Verlander is Baltimore. I said you can look at it. I think that was even the thumbnail of my show, was that they have the prospects, they have the need, and Verlander taking the pressure off. We need an ace on this team takes a huge amount of pressure off everyone else, kind of like it did in, let me see, what's the year I'm looking for? 2017 with the Houston Astros, who did have a much deeper starting pitching staff than this Baltimore team. But I think my point stands, and I yield my time.
Yeah, and I made this video, put this out, on YouTube. It's the podcast, and I got a lot of Orioles fans that kind of, I don't want to say came at me. Most of them were pretty polite, but their perspective of it was they were fine that the Orioles didn't go out and get a pitcher besides Jack Flaherty, when really you arguably needed 2 starters plus some bullpen reinforcements. And their arguments, there was 2 real arguments here. And I'm going to take them separately. Argument number 1 was Baltimore's going to be in this position a lot going forward. And so we can't...
they're psychics. Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
All right.
We can't tear down the farm system. We can't have a fire sale of the farm system to improve the team this year because you're ahead of schedule and they're going to be doing this many, many times. And before I even get to point 2, my observation there is this position is different. You have the best record in the American League. The Yankees are not good. The Red Sox are not good. The Blue Jays aren't that great. The AL Central is awful. How often are all of those things going to happen to you at the same time? And so what you are doing is you are sacrificing the opportunity to make the World Series this year for a chance at doing it again in the future. Because what they're not thinking about is luck is a much bigger part of baseball than we get credit for. The Atlanta Braves in the 1990s won 11 straight division titles, and they won exactly one World Series. Just one. And that was the first year.
And many times they lost to way inferior teams on paper.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
they lost to the Cleveland
Philadelphia Phillies. No, they didn't lose to Cleveland. They only beat Cleveland. Was the only one they ever beat.
Right.
But even the Yankee team in '96, they beat like a rented drum in games 1 and 2. It looked like it was going to be a sad sweep. They lost to the Marlins one year. They lost to the Padres one year. They lost to the Cardinals in the year where they had no business losing to the Cardinals. You know, they lost to the Giants in 2002 in the year they had no business losing to the Giants. I mean, that was, you know, they were year in and year out. I'll take another point on that before we go to point 2.
Yeah.
Do you know what team thought they were going to be there for a long time? They got the team together a long, long time. Are the Chicago White Sox. The White Sox, as recently, going to go all the way back to 2021, when they won the division. They made the playoffs for the second straight year. They had a core of players. They're going to be in the playoffs every single year in a weak division. What did they do the other day? They sold everything except the statue of Harold Baines. So you don't know how long your window of opportunity is going to be. Mm-hmm. You don't know. And in so many ways, we'll get to the other points for a second, but so many ways, when you have the parts to put together the team, you got to do it right away. And that kind of reminds me of an ad. Hey, for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same as when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can make sure that every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know that the part will fit, or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game. When you show up on eBay Motors, and with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Sorry, Blue Jays fans. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right. So, okay, we made the first point. There's a second point he had to make about the Orioles. And by the way, Lindsay Crosby was worked up. He was writing notes. He brought his homework in with him. Okay, so the first part is you can't assume that these events, that you're going to have a bad Red Sox and Yankee team, a weak Central, a kind of unpredictable West. You can't always predict you'll have this diamond lane to a potential trip to the ALCS and possible World Series trip.
Yeah, like Tampa having all these pitching injuries. It's just that division alone. 3 different teams have won that division in the last 5 years, and 2 of those 3 went to the World Series. Like, you can't assume you're going to have the same path again. But the other big thing to me, the other big observation I made from all the YouTube comments and people who were in their feelings about what I said, was they said, it's fine because we're going to be able to go out and get an ace this offseason, make a big splash, get a big name to come to Baltimore. And I have to remind everybody that Mark Elias is still the general manager of the Baltimore Orioles. What has he done while he's been in Baltimore to give the impression that he's all of a sudden going to part with prospects that he's never parted with before, or sign a big contract when he's literally never done that? Like, are you just hoping and praying he changes his behavior? It's almost like being in denial, right? Like, almost. Oh yeah, no. Yeah, there's no way they'll just sit back. No, they're going to make a big trade. They're going to go swing. They're going to sign Shohei, or they're going to make a big trade for somebody with a ton of control, a number 1 kind of guy. But he's done nothing to make you think that. You know how many contracts the Orioles have given out for over $100 million in their history?
One
was Chris Davis. Didn't work out that well. Part of the reason Mark Elias has a job is the guy that gave Chris Davis that contract got fired. What has he done that makes you think he's all of a sudden going to decide to part with these prospects or to go out and make a big deal? Because you have more top prospects in AAA than you have spots on the field to play.
That's right.
Them. Their value has never been higher. You have never had a better opportunity to make the World Series, and you don't know that you'll have another opportunity like this to make the World Series, because right now, that rotation, Kyle Gibson, Kyle Bradish, Jack Flaherty, Grayson Rodriguez, Dean Kramer, none of those guys terrify me in Game 1. I am not worried in the slightest about that. Whereas, think about if you play the Astros, you got to go up against Verlander in Game 1. You got Framber Valdez, who just threw a no-hitter in Game 2. If you go and you face Texas, you've got Max Scherzer in Game 1. If you make it there and you're facing somebody like Atlanta, you've got Max Fried and Spencer Strider in Games 1 and 2. Like, every contender has those couple pitchers up top that scare you. And it's very hard to find a World Series champion that has not had that dominating pitcher or two at the very top that scares you. And the Orioles don't have that. And they had a chance to get one and didn't do it.
Yeah. And I think that's damning. The great point that you made was that when you have more prospects than you have positions on the major league roster, then that's dealing from strength. That was the point that I was making with Jackson Holliday, was that, yes, he's an elite prospect. Yes, he might very well be a superstar, or he could be Matt Laporta. But we do know that, and when people argued against the trade when Will Myers was traded to Tampa to bring in James Shields and Wade Davis, and this was the early infancy of my old Sully Baseball podcast, and people thought I was crazy when I said the Royals made a good trade because they needed major league pitching. They got major league pitching. And people say, what are you talking about? Will Myers is going to be an elite MVP for years and years to come. This is a disastrous trade. He had a nice career.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a fine player, made an all-star team, he's obviously a talented person. But do you think the Royals fans looking back at that would want to change that trade? Sometimes you have to trade from your strength.
Nothing is guaranteed in baseball. And the guys that they did ship out to go and get Jack Flaherty were, number 14 in the system, Cesar Preto. Number 16 in the system, like Drew Rom. Like, not well-known guys. And in the meantime, look at everybody else who got moved. You mean to tell me you couldn't even if you did not want to trade Holiday, let's say you had a top three of, like, you weren't going to trade Holiday, you weren't going to trade, let's say, Colton Cowser and Heston Kjerstad.
Yep.
Picked three random guys. Right. That's fine. You still, in AAA, you had 7 top 100 prospects. You literally had the prospect capital to beat any team for any player that you wanted. Eduardo Rodriguez turned down the Dodgers with like 20 minutes to go before the deadline because he wanted to stay on the East Coast. Guess where Baltimore is, Sully? All you had to do is call and say, hey, I've got Kyle Stowers, I've got Joey Ortiz, I've got DL Hall. Let's have a conversation. That's 3 top 15 prospects. Detroit would have talked to you. You had a shot to make that happen.
Well, let's talk about, we talked about the negative one. Let's talk about a positive one.
Oh, yeah.
A team that went out there and I think showed a lot of guts by saying, hey, we have the highest payroll in baseball, highest payroll in the history of baseball with the New York Mets, and it's not going to happen this year. So let's not just trade fringe players like, players we're going to non-tender these guys and we'll just get something for them. No, let's trade away our superstars and come out and say, we're probably not going to contend next year either. But do you know what? 2025 and beyond, we're going to be great. And so they made the trades, and I'm not the expert that you are on who some of these prospects are, but I was just sort of looking and saying, like, wow, if you are telling me the Mets have brought in Luis Angel Acuna,
yeah.
of which someone corrected me on the pronunciation, Luis Angel Acuna, Justin Jarvis, Marco Vargas, Drew Gilbert, Ryan Clifford. All of a sudden, you've injected 5 quality young players into their system that they have control over for a bunch of players who will not be part of the team, will probably not be effective major leaguers in 2025. You'll have the floor in just a second. I was saying that the last time a New York team of any kind, say for Major League Soccer, has won a championship with the Giants of 2012. You have an entire generation of kids in New York who have never seen one of their teams win a major sports championship. We've never had a streak like that ever. Yeah, the Knicks are bad, but there's always been some team. The Yankees won, Mets won, the New York Giants won, some team, the Rangers, the Devils, some team has won at one point. And you could, if using the rule of 7 that you don't start following sports till you're around 7 years old, there are 18-year-old New York fans saying, I wonder if any of my teams are ever going to win. So this nonsense of New York teams can't rebuild because New York fans will accept nothing less than a championship. Oh, how's that been working out? A generation doesn't know even, and doesn't matter unless you're just absolutely crazy for Major League Soccer, which, by the way, every star in Major League Soccer would leave that league in 3, 2, 1 for the Premier League, which gives you an idea that it should be called minor league soccer. But the Mets are saying, hey, if we're not going to win now, probably not going to win next year either. So why don't we aim and try to put together a core of young players and then use my money to put it together? They gave it a stab. It didn't work. And they were smart enough to say, fine, then let's do it differently. And I give them all the credit in the world for being smart.
It is very difficult to pull the plug and say, that's a sunk cost. I've already spent that money. It didn't work out. Let me do something different. And the Mets used Steve Cohen's money to buy down the deals of the guys that they sent out. And they did a couple really smart things. One, they took these overpriced veterans and made them into underpriced veterans. No team in baseball wanted Max Scherzer at $43 million. Not this version of Max Scherzer we saw this year. But at 23, that's a lot more doable. Same thing with Justin Verlander. It's like $43 million for Justin Verlander. That's hard to do. But 32, that's a lot closer. And what I love, there's a couple things that they did that I love with this. One is the timing of it. They go the day before the trade deadline and they trade Max Scherzer, who is, 41, to Texas. Okay. The next day, they turn around and get an even higher price for the other ace to Texas's division rival. So they raised their price for themselves. They got themselves more money by the timing of it. They traded a bunch of 36, 38, 39, 40-year-old pitchers, and they got 4 top 100 prospects.
Yeah.
Like, they're going to be probably number 10 or number 11 in organizational talent now. Simply because they said anybody whose contract expires after 23 or 24 is fair game. Because we know our window is 25. They're developing pitching with that 24 or 25 time frame in mind. And a lot of these guys are younger. There was a 17-year-old in there. Mm-hmm. There was 2 17-year-olds in there. I'm sorry, 2 17-year-olds in there.
Vargas is really young, who they got from Miami.
He's one of them. Yeah, he's one of them, but he's going to be a top 100 prospect because he looks to be incredibly talented. They got the Astros' 2 best prospects, which they didn't have a ton of great outfield prospects. Now you've got Drew Gilbert. He's going to be your center fielder in a year and a half. Justin Jarvis from the Brewers looks like a pretty good arm. You got him for Mark Canha.
Yeah.
And so, there's a couple lessons to be taken, to take away from this. And it's one, you have to commit one way or the other. That's the issue with the New York Yankees, is they didn't commit to buy or sell, and they just sat in the middle. And in 2 years, the Mets will be better than the Yankees. And it's because the Mets made a decision and the Yankees did not. But then also, they understood the value of pitching. As baseball gets more and more analytically inclined, it is getting cheaper and cheaper to find a bat. What hitter went for a big return this year? None of them. Unless it's a star, they're not going for big returns. Jeimer Candelario got you 2 15 to 20 range prospects. Mark Canha got you 1 lottery ticket arm. Tommy Pham got you one lottery ticket shortstop at 17 years old. But every single pitcher is incredibly overpriced at the trade deadline because everybody needs relievers, and you never have enough starters because the average team is going to use, if they're lucky, is going to use 10 in a season. Yeah. And so they had a bunch of pitchers on expiring deals. They signed some veterans to one-year deals and flipped them. And if I'm constructing a major league roster and I'm going to have a weakness going into the season, I'd rather it be at a corner infield spot than I would in the bullpen or the rotation because of the cost to fix those things. And even going back to Eduardo Escobar, they traded Eduardo Escobar to the Angels a couple weeks ago. Arms. Yeah. They have added so much talent. They have taken 3 years of rebuilding and compressed it into 2 days.
And if they win, the Mets will be the team an entire generation has been waiting for. And I think that can't be underestimated. All right, wrapping up here with Lindsay Crosby. Just wanted to bring up the fact that there were some very dumb losses today. The dumbest loss was by the Milwaukee Brewers. The Red Sox bullpen fell apart against the Seattle Mariners. Cutter Crawford pitched great through 5 innings. They took him out, then the bullpen fell apart, and the Mariners are sneaking up on people on that standings. The Brewers, who were trying to win that division or trying to hold on a wild card, had a lead in the 9th inning, and there was a play. They loaded the bases against Washington. There was a play where the third baseman threw home, and the Brewers catcher was trying to keep his foot on the plate to get the force, and by keeping his foot on the plate, he tried to reach out, and the ball went beyond him. So by trying to get the out, he let the tying run score and the winning run score. And let me tell you something. If the Brewers miss the playoffs by 1 game again, like they did last year, remember August 2nd when they blew that series with Williams on the mound for the Brewers against the miserable Washington Nationals. I got one other thing to do. Do a little bit of house cleaner. My trivia question is still up. Craig Brindle, who usually gets my trivia questions 100% correct, the question is, which major league pitcher has the highest career win total for playing for a career that they only played for one team their whole career in the National League? In the American League, it's Walter Johnson. But who is it in the National League? Now, I got a couple of good guesses. Craig Brindle guessed Bob Gibson. You are so close. He missed it by 2 wins. By 2 wins. There's your hint for you. We also got Adam Scott Bristol, who's listening to the show for a billion years, said Fergie Jenkins. Fergie Jenkins played for the Phillies, the Cubs, the Red Sox, and the Rangers. They had to play for one team their whole career. That's the question. So shoot me that answer at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast Instagram, Locked On MLB on Twitter, or in the YouTube comments below. Lindsay Crosby is the host of Locked On MLB Prospects. Any final thoughts before we call it a show?
More teams need to be willing to go for it at the deadline or need to be willing to tear it down.
Right.
We had 3 sellers this year. All 3 sellers got made a ton because they were the only ones selling. And we had a bunch of teams that should have been aggressive at buying and weren't. And if the Orioles don't win the World Series or even make the World Series, if they get knocked out in the first round, we're going to look back to August 1st and say, that's where they screwed it up right there. They didn't get a good pitcher.
That's when essentially they'll become the Twins. All those years the Twins make the playoffs and no one remembers because they get bumped so early. Of course, some of those teams had Johan Santana, but I digress. All right. Hey, follow us at Locked On MLB Pods. I mentioned all that. Follow Lindsay's show at Locked On Farm, which is on Twitter, and you're at Crosby Baseball on Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. It's going to be gone in a few weeks. But make sure to help us get to our goal of 1 billion subscribers here on YouTube. We're up to 2,000. I'd like to reach 1 billion by the end of the regular season. So, talking about the ways to do it, the ways not to do it, and the ways not to win, the ways to lose, the ways to rebuild, and telling us that we're probably going to see in 2025 in an NLCS between the Cardinals and the Mets with the haul of players that they got in the last couple of days. And come on, Orioles, you better win. Otherwise, we're going to be looking back at this for a long time. This has been a Locked On MLB, Locked On MLB Prospects crossover. He's Lindsay Crosby. My name is Paul Francis Sullivan. Please, I'm begging you, call me Sully.